Gotham's skyline loomed like a jagged silhouette, veiled in the darkness of a city that never slept. In the heart of it all, Bruce Wayne stood alone in the cold, his cape fluttering in the wind, a figure wrapped in shadows. His eyes, tired yet unyielding, scanned the city's expanse, its streets that twisted and turned like the labyrinth of his own mind. The loss of Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, still haunted him. It had been months since she fell in battle, her death a wound that refused to heal. And yet, from the wreckage of that loss came a fragile hope. Bruce had taken her daughter, Lyra, into his care. She was barely a child when Diana's life was snatched away, but the weight of her mother's legacy was already written in her blood. He had promised Diana that he would protect her daughter, but the promise weighed heavier with each passing day. The girl had power, untamed and volatile, much like her mother. Bruce had seen glimpses of it, of the way she could move like lightning or make the earth tremble beneath her feet. But the girl was not yet a warrior. She was a young woman caught between two worlds, her heart as torn as the city he protected. Lyra stood on the balcony of the Wayne Tower, her face cast in the glow of the moon, her hair flowing in the wind. She was beautiful, but there was an edge to her that made her seem older than her years. The raw power that pulsed inside her seemed to weigh on her shoulders. Bruce had seen it. The moment she looked at him with those piercing eyes, it was as if she was asking for something. For guidance, for approval, for freedom. "Come inside, Lyra," Bruce called, his voice as deep and steady as the darkness that surrounded them. But the girl didn't move, her gaze fixed on the city below. "I'm fine," she answered quietly, her voice carrying a note of something unspoken, something fierce. She had always been strong-willed, and Bruce had known from the beginning that she would not be easily shaped. But it was more than that. There was a fire in her, one that reminded him of Diana. A fire that, if left unchecked, could burn everything in its path. Bruce stepped closer, his boots tapping softly against the cold marble floor. He reached out a hand, but stopped just short of touching her shoulder. The space between them was more than just physical. It was the weight of all the things they hadn't said, all the walls they had built between each other since her arrival. "You can't keep running from who you are," Bruce said, his voice softer now. "You're not just Diana's daughter. You're Lyra Wayne, and you have a responsibility to this city." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with an intensity that made Bruce's heart tighten. "I don't want to be anyone's shadow," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not hers, not yours." Bruce could feel the raw pain in her words, the rebellion that churned in her chest. He understood it all too well. The city had shaped him into the man he was, hard, relentless, always standing in the shadows. But Lyra was different. She didn't need to become him. She needed to become herself. For a moment, they just stood there, locked in that quiet struggle, both knowing that the storm was coming. It always did. Then, without another word, Lyra turned and walked back into the shadows of the tower. Bruce stayed where he was, staring out into the night. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but one thing was clear. They couldn't outrun it forever. And neither of them would be prepared for the dangerous love that was about to unfold. The night was silent, broken only by the soft hum of the Batmobile as it cut through the streets of Gotham. Bruce Wayne's mind raced, his thoughts tangled with the memory of Lyra's words. Her defiance, her pain. He could feel the weight of her resistance, the invisible walls she had built around herself. The girl was more than just Diana's daughter. She was something else, something dangerous and powerful in ways Bruce could barely comprehend. She was a force of nature, a tempest bound in flesh. But no one could teach her how to control it. Not even him. His hand gripped the steering wheel tighter as the city sped past in a blur of lights and shadows. He had been in this fight before, against criminals, against the darkness that threatened to consume Gotham. But this was different. Lyra was different. Her power was not something that could be subdued by the same methods that had worked for him all these years. She needed something more. The Batmobile screeched to a halt outside the Batcave, and Bruce stepped out, his cape fluttering behind him like a shadow. He didn't look back at the empty streets, didn't wait for the echo of the engine to fade into silence. There was no time for that. He had to focus. He had to find a way to reach her. Inside the Batcave, the air was thick with the scent of oil and metal. The walls hummed with the low, comforting sound of machines in motion, but Bruce barely noticed. His gaze drifted to the shadows, where Lyra's presence seemed to linger, even in her absence. She had been quiet all day, avoiding him, retreating into the dark corners of the mansion where only her thoughts could follow. He could feel her restlessness, her unease. It was as if the world was closing in on her. Suddenly, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell. Bruce didn't have to turn to know it was her. Lyra stood at the entrance to the Batcave, her silhouette framed by the dim light. She wore the same look of defiance, the same fire that had burned in her eyes earlier. But there was something different in the air tonight. Something heavy, something broken. "I can't keep doing this." Lyra's voice cracked as she spoke, the words laced with frustration. She stepped forward, her boots echoing with every step. "You keep telling me I need to be something I'm not. You think I can just step into her shoes? Into your shoes? I'm not like you. I'm not her." Bruce took a breath, his eyes softening as he studied her. He knew that look. He had seen it too many times in the mirror. The struggle, the fear of becoming something else, something unrecognizable. It was the same fear that had gripped him when he first took up the mantle of the Bat, but he had pushed it down, buried it under the weight of his duty. It was easier that way. "I'm not asking you to be anyone else, Lyra," Bruce said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet urgency. "You're not her. You're you. And that's exactly what this city needs. But you need to understand, your power is a gift. It's also a curse. If you don't learn to control it, it will destroy everything." Lyra clenched her fists, her body trembling with the force of her emotions. She wanted to scream, to run, to get away from everything that held her in place. But something in Bruce's voice stopped her. It wasn't pity. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something raw and vulnerable. She glanced at the bat symbol behind him, its gleaming silhouette casting a shadow over the cave. It was a symbol of justice, of fear, of a man who had built his life around the fight against darkness. But for the first time, it felt like a prison to her, a cage made of ideals, not of steel. "I don't want to be a weapon, Bruce," she whispered, the weight of her words hanging in the air between them. Bruce's jaw tightened, his mind racing. The girl had inherited more than just her mother's strength. She had inherited her mother's heart. The same heart that had loved, fought, and sacrificed. But it was clear now that Lyra would never be content living in anyone's shadow. Not Diana's. Not his. He stepped toward her slowly, as if each movement carried the weight of their shared past, their shared pain. His hand reached out, hovering near her shoulder. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. There was no city, no Batcave, no war to fight. Just the two of them, father and daughter, bound by blood and duty. "You don't have to be a weapon," Bruce said, his voice low, almost gentle. "But you do have to fight. For yourself. For the world." Lyra looked up at him, the fire still burning in her eyes. But now there was something else there, something softer, something that resembled trust. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The city had barely begun to wake when the tremors hit. They were subtle at first, a faint vibration beneath the streets of Gotham. But as the minutes passed, the earth itself seemed to groan under the weight of something massive, something unseen. The alarms in the Batcave blared to life, their shrill warning cutting through the silence. Bruce's eyes snapped open, his instincts kicking in before his mind had fully registered what was happening. In a single fluid motion, he was out of bed, his body moving on autopilot, every nerve awake and alert. The Batcave's computers hummed to life as he approached the central control panel. The images that appeared on the screens were enough to make his heart drop. torn-up city blocks, shattered pavement, entire buildings swaying as though they were made of paper. And then, the source. A massive armored figure emerged from the shadows, its silhouette like a dark giant against the city's skyline. "Lyra," Bruce muttered under his breath, his fingers already flying over the keys. "It's starting." His voice carried the weight of years of preparation, years of training. He had known this day would come, the day when something would challenge them both in a way they couldn't predict. But he wasn't prepared for the feeling of cold dread that settled in his chest as the creature moved closer to Gotham. The warlord had arrived. Lyra's presence in the Batcave was almost ghostly. She hadn't heard the alarms. She hadn't seen the screens flash with the warlord's destruction. But she felt it. The air had shifted, thickened with an unspoken tension. Something in her blood stirred, an ancient pull, an instinct she could no longer ignore. She had been waiting for this moment, whether she wanted to or not. She had heard the stories, tales of a rogue Amazonian warrior who had defied the gods and come to conquer worlds. She had hoped those stories were myths. But now, standing on the edge of the Batcave, Lyra could feel it in her very bones. This wasn't a myth. This was a reality. Bruce turned to face her, his gaze intense and unyielding. "Stay here, Lyra. This isn't your fight." The words hit her like a slap. But she didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not now. Not with the weight of her mother's legacy calling to her. Not with the fire inside her demanding release. "It's my fight too," she said, her voice calm but sharp, like the edge of a blade. "You can't stop me." For a long moment, they stood there, locked in that unspoken struggle. Bruce saw the determination in her eyes, the same fierce determination he had seen in Diana's eyes, in his own when he first became the Bat. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was stopping the warlord before it was too late. "You don't know what you're up against," Bruce said, his voice strained. He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to see Lyra thrown into the fire. "You think you're ready, but you're not. You don't understand the price of this fight." Lyra's eyes never wavered. "Then teach me," she said simply. Bruce hesitated, his mind racing. He could feel the truth of her words, the raw, undeniable power that lay dormant within her. She wasn't a child anymore. She wasn't just Diana's daughter. She was something more, something that could either save them all or destroy everything in its path. The choice wasn't his to make. With a long, slow exhale, Bruce nodded. "Fine, but you follow my lead. You listen to me." For the first time in months, Lyra allowed herself a small, wry smile. It was the smallest of gestures, but to Bruce, it felt like a victory. The moment was fleeting, but it held an unspoken promise. This wasn't just about duty anymore. This was personal. Together, they stepped toward the Batmobile, the sound of its engine roaring to life in the cavernous darkness. The city outside was on the brink of destruction, but for the first time in a long while, Bruce didn't feel like he was alone in the fight. Lyra was with him. And that made all the difference. As the Batmobile surged into the streets, Gotham's skyline crumbling behind them, the warlord's laughter echoed through the air, a chilling sound that sent a shiver down Bruce's spine. They were running out of time. But in this fight, there was no room for hesitation, no room for fear, only the relentless pursuit of survival. And the storm was just beginning. The Batmobile tore through Gotham's streets, its engine roaring like a beast unleashed. Bruce's hands gripped the wheel, his gaze focused ahead, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. He could feel the tension building in his chest, the quiet dread that came before a storm. Beside him, Lyra was silent, her face set in grim determination. He didn't have to look at her to know what she was thinking. They were both thinking the same thing. The warlord wasn't just a threat to Gotham. He was a threat to everything they had fought for. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, flickering with the glow of fires and flashing lights. Chaos. A wave of panic had already spread through the streets, the citizens unaware of the true danger that was closing in. Bruce could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him with every mile they drove. This wasn't just about saving Gotham. This was about protecting Lyra, about keeping her safe from a world that wanted to destroy her. Suddenly, the air changed. It felt heavier, like a warning, a ripple in the fabric of reality itself. Bruce's instincts kicked in, his eyes darting to the road ahead. A dark figure emerged from the shadows, blocking their path. The Batmobile skidded to a halt just in time, its tires screeching against the pavement. The figure in front of them was tall, impossibly so, and draped in armor that shimmered in the dim light. A massive, sword-like weapon was strapped to its back, and its eyes burned with an unnatural fury. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "Is that the warlord?" Bruce finished, his voice tight. He could feel the gravity of the moment in his bones. The warlord was more than just a man, a beast of pure destruction, a force that couldn't be reasoned with. The warlord stepped forward, his presence an overwhelming force. His voice echoed like thunder, sending a shiver down Lyra's spine. "I have come for you, daughter of Wonder Woman." Lyra's pulse quickened, her heart hammering in her chest. She had known this moment would come, but nothing could have prepared her for the terror that crawled up her spine as she met the warlord's gaze. There was no mercy in those eyes, only the cold certainty of a conqueror. "You will join me," the warlord continued, his voice a deep growl. "Together, we will rewrite the world. You will take your place at my side, and we will crush those who stand in our way." Lyra's mind raced. She could feel the fire inside her pushing to break free, urging her to strike, to fight. But something held her back, a flicker of doubt, of fear. Bruce's presence beside her was the only thing that kept her grounded. She turned to him, her eyes searching his for some sign, some direction. Bruce's jaw tightened. He knew what she was feeling. The pull of power, the temptation of strength. But this wasn't the way. Not for her. He had seen it before. Heroes who fell, who let their emotions control their actions. It always ended the same, with destruction. "Lyra," Bruce said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension. "Don't listen to him. He's trying to manipulate you." But the warlord only laughed, a cruel, guttural sound. "You still believe you can control her, Batman," he taunted. "She is my blood, my hair. You are nothing to her." Lyra flinched, the warlord's words striking like a physical blow. For a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to press down on her. She wasn't just Diana's daughter. She wasn't just Bruce's adopted child. She was something far more dangerous, far more powerful. And yet, in the face of the warlord's challenge, she felt small, alone. A dark voice inside her whispered, "What if he's right?" But then she felt it, the surge of warmth, of strength. It wasn't just her own power. It was Bruce's presence beside her. It was the love they had shared, the lessons he had taught her. She wasn't alone. Without warning, Lyra threw herself from the Batmobile, her body moving faster than Bruce could follow. She collided with the warlord in a flash of raw power, her fists glowing with the energy that burned within her. The warlord staggered back, surprised by the force of her attack, but his eyes burned brighter, his own strength rising to meet hers. Bruce's heart pounded in his chest as he watched her fight. This was it. This was the moment that would define them both. He had always known that Lyra's power was her greatest strength, and her greatest danger. Now, they would see which side she chose. The warlord snarled as he regained his footing, swinging his massive sword in a deadly arc. Lyra blocked it with a burst of energy, sending a shockwave through the air. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for everything she believed in, and for the future Bruce had always hoped for her. But in that moment, as the two clashed in the heart of Gotham's chaos, one thing became clear. No matter the outcome, neither of them would ever be the same again. The battle raged on in the heart of Gotham, the echoes of Lyra's and the warlord's clash reverberating through the streets like the drums of an impending war. The city trembled beneath the force of their blows, every punch and kick sending ripples through the very ground. Lyra's fists crackled with energy as they collided with the warlord's steel armor, each strike reverberating with the weight of centuries of power. Bruce watched from the shadows, his eyes never leaving the fight. His body tensed, ready to leap into action at any moment. But he knew better than anyone that Lyra had to do this on her own. She was stronger than she realized, but it was more than strength that would win this battle. It was the control, the ability to harness that power without letting it consume her. The warlord's massive form loomed over her, a shadow of violence and destruction. He swung his sword in a wide arc, aiming for her midsection. Lyra narrowly dodged, her body twisting in a blur of motion. But even as she evaded the strike, she felt the force of it, the air crackling with the danger of every move. "You are my blood," the warlord roared, his voice shaking the very foundations of the city. "You cannot escape what you are, Lyra. You were born for this, to rule, to destroy." Her breath came in quick gasps as she blocked another strike. Is he right? For a moment, doubt crept into her heart. Was she really meant for something more? Was this her destiny, to follow in the footsteps of the warlord, to destroy what she had sworn to protect? She hesitated for a fraction of a second, and it was enough for the warlord to strike. His sword slashed across her arm, the impact sending a sharp pain through her body. She staggered back, biting her lip to keep from crying out. Blood stained her shirt, a stark reminder of the price of power. But as the pain shot through her, something inside her snapped. No, she wasn't going to let this be her fate. She wasn't going to let the warlord define her. She had her own path to carve, and it didn't end in destruction. With a roar, she surged forward, her energy flaring around her like a storm. The warlord's eyes widened in shock as she unleashed a devastating blast of raw power, sending him crashing into the side of a nearby building. The force of the blast shattered the brick and stone, sending debris flying in all directions. Lyra stood there, panting, her eyes burning with a mix of fury and determination. The world seemed to pause, the echo of her power hanging in the air. The warlord struggled to rise, his armor dented and cracked, but his rage was far from gone. He glared at her, his face twisted in a snarl. "You think you've won," he sneered, his voice low and menacing. "This is just the beginning. You cannot escape what you are. You will fall. And when you do, the world will bow to me." Lyra took a step back, her heart pounding. The warlord's words hung in the air like a threat, like a curse. But she didn't let them consume her. She wasn't going to become the monster he wanted her to be. Behind her, Bruce stepped into the light, his voice steady as he spoke. "You've got this, Lyra. This isn't who you are. You choose your own path." Her eyes flicked to him for just a moment, and in that brief glance, she saw the truth of it, the unwavering belief he had in her. For all the battles they had fought, for all the pain they had endured, she knew one thing with certainty. She was not alone. With a cry, Lyra surged forward once more, her fists glowing brighter than ever. She had a purpose. She had something to fight for. And this time, when she struck, the power that erupted from her wasn't just raw strength. It was something more, a force of will, a defiance of everything the warlord represented. She drove her energy straight into his chest, her power so intense that the air itself seemed to catch fire. The warlord's body convulsed under the force, his armor cracking apart like brittle stone. His scream of rage was drowned out by the sheer magnitude of her attack. And then, with a final, resounding crash, the warlord fell. Lyra stood over him, chest heaving, blood dripping from her arm. Her body trembled with the aftermath of the battle. But in that moment, she felt something else. A sense of peace, a sense of freedom. She had made her choice. She had claimed her power, not as a weapon, but as a part of herself. Bruce approached, his eyes filled with pride and relief. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. They both knew this wasn't over. But for the first time, Lyra felt ready to face whatever came next. And in that moment, Gotham seemed to breathe again. The battle was over, but the city still smoldered. Pieces of debris, shattered glass, and scorched buildings littered the streets of Gotham. Silence fell over the ruins like a shroud, broken only by the distant wail of sirens and the crackle of lingering fires. Lyra stood at the center of it all, her chest heaving with the aftermath of the fight, her blood staining her skin. Her arm, now bandaged, throbbed with a dull pain, but it was nothing compared to the weight of what she had just done. The warlord's massive form lay crumpled at her feet, his armor cracked and broken, his body still. The fight had drained her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend, but there was no time to linger, no time to grieve. Behind her, Bruce approached, his steps soft but firm. The steady hum of the Batmobile was the only sound that filled the empty space between them. When he reached her, he didn't speak immediately. He simply stood there, his gaze lingering on the destruction, on the girl who had risen above it all. "You did good," Bruce finally said, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. Lyra didn't turn to look at him. She couldn't. Not yet. Her thoughts were too jumbled, too fractured. The warlord's words still echoed in her mind. "You cannot escape what you are." The power that burned inside her was both a gift and a curse. She had felt it crackle through her as she defeated him, felt it surge in her veins. It was intoxicating. It was dangerous. "I didn't want to be this," she said, her voice small, almost drowned out by the weight of her own thoughts. "I didn't want to be a weapon. I didn't want to become like him." Bruce took a step closer, his shadow falling over her, yet never quite touching her. He understood the feeling. He had walked that path, had faced that same question. What do you become when you embrace your power? He knew the temptation to let it consume you, to wield it like a blade without concern for the consequences. "Power doesn't define you," he said, his voice soft yet unyielding. "How you use it does, and you chose to fight for something greater than yourself. You chose to protect Gotham." Lyra's jaw tightened, her fists clenching at her sides. He was right, but that didn't make it any easier. The warlord had shown her what she could become if she let the darkness inside her take control. He had pushed her to the edge of something terrifying, something that could have swallowed her whole. "I'm not like you, Bruce," she said, finally turning to face him. "I'm not as strong as you. I almost." Bruce shook his head, cutting her off before she could finish. "You are stronger than you think," he said firmly. "Stronger than I was at your age. The difference between us is that you have something I never did. People who believe in you. Diana believed in you. I believe in you." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The words hung in the air like a promise, a bond that neither time nor circumstance could break. The weight of the night's events slowly began to settle, and Lyra felt something shift inside her, something heavier than the power she had wielded. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she whispered, looking down at her hands, still tingling with the energy she had used to defeat the warlord. Bruce's gaze softened, his eyes steady as he met hers. "You don't have to be ready," he said. "You just have to be willing to learn, to grow. We all are." Lyra nodded, a faint sense of resolve flickering within her. There would be more battles ahead, more darkness to face. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a small sense of peace. She had made her choice. She had fought for what mattered. The city, broken and battered, would rebuild. And so would she. Bruce placed a hand on her shoulder, the gesture comforting, grounding. "Let's go home, Lyra," he said softly. "We've got a long road ahead." As they turned to walk away from the wreckage, the distant sounds of Gotham, the city that never slept, came alive again. The streets were scared, but they would heal. Lyra knew that in her heart. She wasn't just Wonder Woman's daughter or Batman's adopted daughter. She was her own person, and that person was ready to face whatever came next. The storm had passed, but the dawn was only beginning to break. The dawn broke over Gotham, the first light of day creeping over the jagged skyline, casting long shadows over the wreckage of the previous night's battle. The city, as always, was resilient. Even after the storm, even after the chaos, Gotham refused to break. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet tension, a silence that felt heavier than any explosion. Bruce stood on the rooftop of Wayne Tower, his eyes scanning the city, his mind still racing. The warlord was gone, but the damage he had done wasn't. Gotham had been shaken to its core, and it was only a matter of time before the ripples spread. Bruce knew it all too well. The aftermath was never just about the fight. It was about what came next. The sound of footsteps behind him pulled him from his thoughts. He didn't need to turn to know it was Lyra. He could feel her presence even before she spoke. "Are we ready for what comes next?" Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability beneath the surface, something raw that she hadn't let show before. She had fought beside him, had stood her ground, but there was a quiet fear in her now, a fear of what lay ahead. Bruce's jaw tightened. He didn't have an answer, not one that would make sense of everything they had just been through. He had always been prepared for the worst, but even he didn't know what was waiting for them. They had faced monsters, villains, and gods before, but something about this felt different. "I don't know," he said softly, "but we'll be ready. We always are." Lyra stepped up beside him, her eyes following his gaze across the city. She had seen the destruction up close, had felt the weight of the warlord's words, "You will fall." It had haunted her ever since, the possibility that everything she had fought for could crumble in an instant. "What if we're not enough?" she asked quietly, more to herself than to Bruce. "What if?" Bruce turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You've seen what we're up against. You've seen what you're capable of. You don't have to be like me, Lyra. You just have to be who you are. And that's enough." For a moment, Lyra didn't respond. She let his words sink in, trying to push aside the self-doubt that had crept into her heart. The warlord had been a brutal reminder of the power she had and how easily it could turn into something dark. But Bruce was right. She didn't have to follow anyone's footsteps. She had her own path to walk. "I don't know if I can be the hero Gotham needs," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can handle the power inside me." Bruce took a step closer, his eyes softening with understanding. He had seen that same doubt in his own reflection once, had felt the weight of his own demons, but he had never stopped fighting. He had never stopped believing that there was more to life than the darkness. "You already are the hero this city needs," Bruce said, his voice firm. "You've proven it. You just have to believe in it." Lyra looked at him, her heart swelling with something she hadn't expected. Gratitude, trust, and maybe, just maybe, hope. The path ahead was uncertain. The world was still broken, still vulnerable, and there was no guarantee they would win. But in that moment, standing on that rooftop, she realized something. They didn't need to have all the answers. They just needed to keep moving forward, together. A faint rumble in the distance broke the moment, and both of them turned to look. A low storm cloud gathered on the horizon, dark and ominous, swirling with the promise of more danger to come. Bruce's eyes narrowed. The battle was never truly over. It would always come back. But this time, Lyra was no longer just a symbol of the past. She was her own force, and together, they would face whatever storm was coming. "We've got this," Bruce said, his voice steady. Lyra nodded. For the first time, she believed it. As they turned away from the edge of the building, the weight of the city pressed down on them both. But in their shared silence, there was something more than just the promise of what lay ahead. There was the unspoken bond of two souls who had found a way to rise above the chaos, to hold on to what mattered most. And in that moment, it didn't matter what came next, because they would face it together. The storm rolled in swiftly, as if the heavens themselves were in league with the chaos below. Dark clouds swirled ominously above Gotham, the sky churning with the promise of more violence. The air was thick with tension, and the ground vibrated with a low, haunting rumble. Something was coming, something far worse than anything they had faced before. And they knew it. Lyra stood at the edge of the rooftop, the wind tugging at her hair and her coat, but she didn't flinch. She was no longer the unsure girl she had been when this all started. The fire that had burned inside her during the battle with the warlord had only grown stronger, the weight of her power now a part of her. And while it scared her, it also gave her strength. Bruce stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His cape fluttered behind him like a black flag, a silent symbol of the city's protector. They both knew that the calm they had briefly tasted was an illusion. The storm that approached wasn't just a weather pattern, it was a warning. Gotham's enemies were far from finished, and the world beyond their city had taken notice. "They're coming," Lyra said, her voice barely rising above the wind. "I can feel it. Something worse than the warlord." Bruce nodded, his jaw set, his expression grim. He had lived in Gotham long enough to know that peace was fleeting, that the calm before a storm was always the most dangerous. There were whispers in the underworld, rumors of something darker, a force that had been quietly assembling in the shadows. And now it was drawing closer, faster than either of them could prepare for. "They'll come for us, for you," Bruce replied, his voice low. "But we won't back down. Not this time." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice strong, steady. "I know what I have to do, and I'm ready." Bruce studied her for a moment, his gaze softening with something between pride and concern. She had grown so much since the first time they'd met, since she had stepped into the shadow of her mother and her legacy. She was no longer just the daughter of Wonder Woman. She was her own force now, and that terrified him more than anything. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly, his voice thick with meaning. "You've got me. You've got all of us." Lyra swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She had always known that the road she walked was one of solitude, but in that moment she realized something. She didn't have to carry this burden alone. Not anymore. The first crack of thunder split the sky, a deafening sound that made the city tremble. And then, from the swirling blackness above, a figure descended, a silhouette against the storm, moving with unnatural speed, its shape massive and powerful. The presence was unmistakable. It was the harbinger of their reckoning. "Here we go," Bruce said, his tone steady, even though his heart raced beneath the weight of the approaching threat. Lyra clenched her fists, the energy within her surging, ready to explode. Her body thrummed with power, and for a moment she could feel the city's heartbeat beneath her feet, the pulse of Gotham, as if it was alive. They were ready. They had to be. The figure landed with a crash, sending a shockwave through the rooftop. Dust and debris flew into the air as the figure rose, revealing a towering armored form, its face obscured by a mask that gleamed with malice, its eyes, glowing a sickly red, fixed on them with deadly intent. "It's him," Lyra whispered, her voice tight with recognition. "The King of Shadows," Bruce said, his gaze steely. "The one who has been pulling the strings." The King of Shadows stood tall, his voice echoing like a thunderclap as he spoke. "The time has come. The city is mine, and so is its power. You, Lyra, are my final piece. You will serve me, or I will destroy everything you hold dear." Lyra stepped forward, her energy crackling like lightning, her eyes locked on his. "I don't answer to you," she said, her voice filled with a cold fury. "I fight for what's right, and that includes this city." The King of Shadows laughed, a dark, hollow sound that sent chills down her spine. "You think you can stand against me? You are nothing but a weapon, just like your mother, just like your father." The words stung, but they only fueled her fire. She wasn't a weapon. She was more than that. She was her own person, and no one would control her, not even him. "This city belongs to its people," she said, her voice unwavering, "and I'll fight until my last breath to protect it." With a roar, the King of Shadows lunged, his massive form a blur of darkness. Lyra surged forward to meet him, her energy exploding in a flash of light. The battle had begun. As they collided, the storm overhead raged with them, the heavens themselves seeming to join the battle.